There is a story so old the canyons themselves carry it in their stone walls, about a creature clever enough to outsmart nearly everyone around him, and foolish enough, in the end, to outsmart only himself. And the afternoon. He borrowed a pair of wings he was never, not even for a single breath, meant to wear. This is that story. The events of this tale unfold in the ancient days of the American Southwest, long before the first roads were pressed into the red earth, in a vast canyon basin, where the ochre cliffs rose like the walls of a forgotten temple, and the river below moved with the quiet confidence of something that has been going exactly where it pleases for thousands of years. The animals of this land each understood their gifts and lived by them. The mule deer with her patient listening, the tortoise with his unshakable steadiness, the red-tailed hawk with his clean authority over the open sky above the canyon rim. And then there was Coyote. Coyote was not, by any fair account, poorly provided for in the matter of natural ability. He was fast, genuinely and spectacularly fast. The kind of fast that left small spirals of red dust spinning in his wake, and caused the jackrabbits to maintain a standing policy of not engaging with him on open ground. His ears caught sounds that other animals missed entirely. His nose was an instrument of considerable precision. His mind turned at a speed that should, by every reasonable measure, have left him deeply content with his situation. And yet, every single morning, without exception, Coyote would position himself at the rim of the mesa, lift his narrow nose toward the enormous sky, and watch the birds with an expression that can only be described as theatrical suffering of the first order. He watched the eagles drift in wide, unhurried spirals on the canyon thermals, barely flexing a feather, covering great distances without the slightest apparent effort. He watched the sparrows weave between the juniper branches, as though gravity had agreed, on their behalf specifically, to take the morning off. He watched the ravens, those dark and irreverent creatures, riding columns of warm, rising air with the easy, self-satisfied manner of beings who have made very good arrangements with the atmosphere. Something hot and tight gathered in his chest each time, a feeling he preferred not to name with any accuracy, though anyone passing by would have recognized it immediately as envy of a particularly evolved variety. He told himself he was simply a creature of expansive curiosity and broad intellectual interests. He told himself that a mind like his naturally required a wider perspective, a higher vantage point, a better view. He was, as previously noted, very skilled at telling himself things. One late afternoon, when the canyon light had turned the colour of warm copper, and the long shadows had begun their evening drift across the red ground, Coyote spotted Old Eagle resting on the highest stone shelf above the basin, his great wings folded against him with the unhurried dignity of someone with nowhere pressing to be and no intention of pretending otherwise. Coyote went still. He observed. He considered. And then, slowly, with the deliberate satisfaction of a creature assembling the framework of a plan he was already absolutely certain was brilliant. A smile settled across his narrow face. Coyote arrived at the base of Old Eagle's rock shelf the following morning, with his performance already well underway. Because the approach itself was part of the strategy, he had arranged his face into an expression of humble admiration that he had practiced against a still pool of water, which had, to its credit, not given him any feedback either way. He began talking while still climbing, so that his opening sentences arrived to Old Eagle accompanied by the mild exertion of the ascent, which Coyote felt lent him an air of earnest effort. Old Eagle, he called, most luminous of all creatures who have ever cast a shadow across the earth below them, wisest living thing in all directions, whose very presence in the sky above the canyon makes the canyon a more distinguished canyon. I have come to you today as a sincere and uncomplicated admirer, with nothing but the purest and most straightforward of questions. Old Eagle opened one eye. He did not otherwise move. Coyote took this as encouragement and continued, producing a sustained and remarkably detailed inventory of old Eagle's excellences that covered the wingspan, the talons, the head posture, the hunting technique, the philosophical implications of the eagle's characteristic, stillness, and several other categories that emerged organically as he went. Old Eagle listened to all of this with the patience of a mountain receiving rain, neither moved nor particularly surprised, watching Coyote the way a creature watches something that has been going on for a while and is clearly approaching its conclusion. When the praise finally exhausted itself, and Coyote arrived at his actual question, which was whether Eagle might share with him the secret of flight, Old Eagle considered him for a long, quiet moment. Then Old Eagle reached behind himself and drew out a backpack, old and weathered the leather, stitched and worn in the manner of something that has been carried a very long distance over a very long time. "This pack," Eagle said, his voice carrying the low, unhurried weight of a person choosing their words with care because they expect them to matter, "contains the winds of patience and humility. Put it on, and you will float, but do not open it until you understand its true weight." Coyote's eyes travelled over the backpack with the intensity of a creature calculating the distance between where he was and where he intended to be. He nodded with great and visible sincerity. He repeated the words patience and humility in a tone that implied a deep and long-standing personal familiarity with both. Eagle placed the backpack in Coyote's eager hands, and Coyote fitted the straps over his shoulders. With the barely contained energy of a creature already racing, in his mind, toward everything that was about to become his, Coyote chose a ledge overlooking the deepest section of the canyon for his departure, a choice that any observer with a concern for basic physics might have found alarming, but Coyote had moved well past the territory where such concerns held any relevance. He squared his shoulders. He adjusted the straps of the backpack with the careful precision of someone who wants their moment of transformation to begin on properly managed terms. He looked out across the vast, wind-carved basin below him and arranged his face into the expression of a creature standing at the beginning of a new and better era of his existence. Then he stepped off the edge. The canyon floor rushed upward to meet him with tremendous commitment, and Coyote had just assembled the initial components of a fairly comprehensive expression of alarm when the backpack seemed to recognize the moment, the winds inside it, filling and pressing outward, the air around him bending to accommodate what was contained in that old leather, and he rose. He rose steadily and without drama, the ground receding beneath his feet, the red walls dropping away below him, the thermals pressing upward like a broad and invisible hand. Coyote floated in silence above the canyon and experienced, for the first time in his memory, the precise sensation of getting exactly what he wanted. The silence lasted roughly 4 minutes, which was, in retrospect, about as long as it was ever going to last. Because within those 4 minutes, Coyote had assessed the situation from his new altitude and determined that it required him to issue several announcements. He circled above the tortoise and informed him, at some volume, that the view from up here cast certain ground-level existences in a rather diminishing light. He made 2 low passes over a group of jackrabbits to deliver a formal proclamation establishing himself as supreme king of all living things, which he repeated at sufficient volume to ensure it registered. He drifted past a family of ravens who regarded him with the flat, unruffled expressions of creatures who have observed this particular arc of behaviour before and have a clear sense of how it resolves. And then his gaze settled on the backpack resting against his back, and a thought arrived with absolute confidence and the worst possible timing. Eagle had been specific about not opening it. Eagle had been very deliberate about this particular instruction, but Coyote, floating high above the earth in a moment of peak certainty, had arrived at the firm conclusion that Eagle's insistence on this point was itself the clearest possible evidence that something extraordinary was inside, something valuable and powerful that Eagle had simply preferred to keep for himself, with the swift, clean logic of a creature whose mind has already made its decision. and is now locating the reasoning to accompany it. Coyote reached back and unfastened the pack. What came out was immediate and without any interest in being gradual about it. The full, uncontained force of true patience and true humility, neither of which has any patience for being dismissed, and neither of which is humble about being misused, erupted from that old leather in a churning, towering whirlwind that caught Coyote without ceremony and held him at its center, spinning at a rate that was, from a strictly physical standpoint, genuinely impressive. He came down in a broad patch of prickly pear cactus at the floor of the canyon, and the landing was, in the narrowest technical sense, a survivable one, which was about all that could be said in its favor. The cactus received him with the impartial thoroughness of something that does not distinguish between good intentions and poor decisions, and simply responds to whatever arrives. Coyote lay still for a moment, in the specific quiet of a creature, performing a rapid internal review of the sequence of choices that had led him to this particular location. The whirlwind subsided above him with the complete indifference of a force that has made its point and has no further agenda. The canyon returned to its ordinary composure, as it generally does, because from the canyon's long perspective, this sort of thing is not particularly unusual. Old Eagle descended in a long, unhurried spiral, settled a short distance away, and regarded Coyote with an expression that contained neither satisfaction nor surprise. Simply the calm acknowledgement of something he had known was coming, he said after a moment, in the same low and measured voice he brought to everything. Those who fly on borrowed wings fall the hardest, my friend. Coyote removed several cactus spines from the end of his nose and said nothing. This was, given everything his listeners knew of him, a remarkable development in itself. The silence between them was long enough to mean something, and Old Eagle let it be exactly that long before spreading his wings and rising back into the sky, returning to the high stone shelf where the thermals would carry him without any help from borrowed equipment. Coyote lay in the cactus and looked up at the wide blue above him, and, for what may have been the first time in his life, thought something that was not a plan, not a scheme, not a construction of clever premises arranged toward a convenient conclusion. Back at the fire, Grandpa Nasuba let the story settle into the warm dark around the listening faces of his grandchildren. He leaned forward slightly, the way a person does when they have one more thing to say and they want it to go somewhere it will stay. Coyote had the fastest legs in that canyon, he said. He could outrun the morning wind across open ground. That was his, given to him, belonging to him and no one else. But he spent his mornings staring at the sky, aching for what someone else had been built for. And when he grabbed those borrowed wings, he got a cactus patch instead of a kingdom. He paused in the comfortable way of someone who knows exactly what he is about to say next. The world has no shortage of people offering you a magical backpack, he told them. A secret shortcut, a borrowed formula. Someone else's method for someone else's gift. Some of them will even get you off the ground for a little while, but the only wings that will hold you are the ones that grew from your own patience, your own effort, your own slow and honest years. Everything else is just borrowed wind. The greatest gift we possess is often the one we are too busy comparing to someone else's gift to actually use. Coyote had been given extraordinary speed, sharp perception, and a tireless mind, and he spent his mornings mourning the fact that he could not also have wings. When he borrowed power that did not belong to him and disregarded the conditions that made it safe, he lost everything he had briefly gained and landed in considerably worse shape than where he started. Lasting success does not come from acquiring someone else's method or shortcutting someone else's discipline. It grows from the patient, honest development of what is already and genuinely yours. If this story made you laugh or think or both at once, subscribe and share it with someone who might be standing on a ledge with a backpack they were told not to open.